Welcome, curious minds, to Paranormal M. Brace yourself for a roller coaster ride through the unexplained. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment, hit the like button. I'd appreciate it. And be prepared for a front row seat to our most bewildering stories, updated daily. Ask Reddit. I may have seen a drowned boy during a sunny day at summer camp. I would have written it off as one of the many weird, unexplained moments in my time with the Scouts, if it weren't for the fact that my friend saw the same boy run past us and into a KYBO. It's our outhouse for the uninitiated. The day before, a group of us were heading to the lake for a midday swim. The air was dry and heated. All we wanted to do was to get away from the trail dust permeating the entire camp. The shoreline was close. We could smell the water. We became excited and joked loudly enough to not hear the ambulance trundling up the dirt road till it was in view. No lights, no sirens. We got to the shore, and there were many camp counselors there, hugging and weeping into each other's shoulders. The lake's closed for the day, we were told by a red-eyed young man who taught the canoe classes. I found out later that a boy had drowned in the lake. I didn't get the details, but it happened fast enough so that they didn't really fish him out until it was too late. I saw his picture in memorial. His troop made that after the summer. He was young and small for his age, 12 years old with curly black mop on his head. The day after the lake incident, my friend and I were heading to the KYBO before going to our classes. That's when a boy ran past us. He bolted to the door, heaved it open, and disappeared inside of the small brick structure. The door was spring-loaded, nearly closed by the time we reached it. Immediately, we stopped in our tracks. There was nobody inside of the KYBO. I don't mean that he escaped out a window or another door. There was no way in besides the door that we were standing in. The windows were 7 feet off the ground, and no more than ventilation slits were present. I asked my friend if he saw anything. He said, yeah, skinny little kid, curly black hair. His clothes were dry at least. I saved a girl's life, and I can't accept it was just a coincidence. A few years ago, I was on a train home. It was a warm summer afternoon, and I remember being in a particularly good mood as I stood by the train doors looking out of the window. The sun was shining, I felt good, and I didn't want to spend the rest of the evening stuck indoors. So I thought, why not get off the train a stop early, walk the rest of the way home? So that's what I did. I got off the train at Lewisham Station, southeast London, which is around a 30-minute walk from my then home, which was situated not far from Hither Green Station, my original destination. Slowly started walking home. I could have taken a shortcut and followed a busy road towards Hither Green, but instead decided to walk the longer route through the nearby shopping center and up the busy Lewisham High Street, in search of some smiles and some excitement. The high street was unusually quiet that day. I'm not sure if there was a big sporting event happening or something, but I remember there weren't as many cars or people around as usual. I had a pleasant, slow walk along the high street, enjoying every last photon I could absorb. Came to a junction where I had to turn left onto Court Hill Road, which leads up to a hill to Hither Green Lane. As soon as I turned left onto Court Hill Road, my attention was immediately drawn to, on the opposite side of the road, a lady pushing a pushchair up the hill. She had a baby in a buggy that I couldn't see at the time and a small toddler walking and skipping alongside her. She was holding onto the left handle of the buggy. Smiled to myself, thinking how heartwarming they looked together. remembering back when I was that age, happily skipping along holding onto my mother's hand. They were probably 75 meters ahead of me when I turned onto the road, and we were walking at pretty much the same pace. For no reason whatsoever, I decided to speed up a little bit. A minute or two later, I'd gotten to maybe 1/3 of the way along the road and had closed the gap between us a little bit, but they were still maybe 50 meters ahead of me. For no reason whatsoever, I suddenly felt like jogging. So I very lazily start jogging, more like bouncing up the hill, and all I could think about was this family on the opposite side of the road. I was fixated on them. Then again, for no reason whatsoever, I suddenly wanted to cross the road, despite the fact that I lived on the left side, and crossing was the opposite of what I'd normally do. It made no sense for me to cross over, but I wanted to. So I step out into the road, which was totally silent with not a car in sight. Start bouncing diagonally across the road. I physically couldn't have jogged any slower. I was in this relaxed, zen-like state. I was in no hurry to get home, but had this urge to get closer to this family walking ahead of me. They were like a magnet drawing me closer. I was jogging straight towards them. I got to around 30 meters behind them, in the middle of the road now. Still not a car in sight. Decided I'd speed up a little, not much. I was still bouncing, but with just a little pinch more effort. They were almost at the top of the hill at this point, and I was maybe 2/3 of the way up. Suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, the toddler, a little girl, decides to dance straight into the middle of the road. Her mother, in an obvious panic, screamed at the girl to get out of the road, which instead caused the girl to panic herself. Frozen to the spot, she started crying. The mother, still holding the buggy, had also frozen in panic and stood screaming. That's when I heard the engine. At the top of Court Hill Road, it's a right turn that leads to Hither Green Lane. Both sides of the road have trees and brick walls lining them, so it's impossible to see around the corner no matter which direction you're heading. Vehicles often drive far too quickly when coming down on the hill, and usually exit the corner at the top, maybe second gear around 30 miles an hour. I could hear a vehicle coming, a diesel engine by the sound of it. It was revving hard and the girl wasn't moving. I didn't speed up, I just kept bouncing straight up the middle of the road toward the girl at the same pace. Total zen, totally relaxed, almost too relaxed. My mind was clear. She was facing uphill and had no idea it was coming. The mother also had no idea it was there. I got to around 10 meters behind them when the white van came flying around the corner. In 5 seconds' time, the van would be where I was currently standing, 10 meters behind this girl, and it wasn't slowing down. The girl was frozen in a panic. The mother was frozen in a panic. It was time to be a hero. I got to the girl and slipped each hand under each of her armpits. I looked up and see the van is 2 seconds away, if that. I lifted her foot off the ground, turned right, and took a step toward the pavement. I was still in the road. I knew the van was going to hit me as there's no time. As I thought that if it did, and I was still holding the girl, that she'd end up being dragged backwards along the road with me. So instead of putting her down on the ground, I stood arms out straight, holding a foot above the pavement, thinking that, after the impact had taken me out, gravity would be the stronger of the two forces and would gently pull her down toward the pavement. The van flew past, and luckily I was only clipped on the left shoulder by the wing mirror. Barely touched me. I put the girl down on the pavement, who was now standing silent and totally confused as to how she'd somehow floated the 10 feet from the middle of the road to her mother's side. Spun her around to face me, got down on one knee and said sternly, "Hey, Look at me. Never go in the road again, do you hear me?" At which point she realized what had happened, started crying again. Maybe I'm just ugly and my face scared her. The mother, who was still frozen in fear up until this point, now stood staring at me, jaw open, wondering where the hell I'd come from. She snapped out of it and started thanking me. "Oh my God, thank you, oh my God." I just smiled, nodded, and walked on. I turned and looked back and saw the mother rubbing the girl up and down, checking for injuries and hugging her, and I laughed. Over the years, I've replayed this event 1,000 times in my head. 2 seconds, that's all she had left. From the moment I scooped her up to the moment the van flew past us was 2 seconds. If I hadn't gotten off the train, stopped early, she was dead. If I hadn't sped up at the bottom of the hill, she was dead. If I hadn't decided to start jogging for no reason, she was dead. If I hadn't decided to cross the road and head straight towards them, she was dead. If I'd done anything differently that day, the world would have lost this beautiful little girl. I often wonder how her life turned out. She's probably a sassy teenager now. I cannot accept that everything that happened leading up to it was random coincidence. It felt like I was being sucked towards them. Why did I start jogging uphill? Why did I cross over? Why was I so fixated on them? Why did I speed up walking when I was having such an enjoyable slow walk? Why was I so relaxed that even when I saw the van meters away from my face, I didn't break out of the slow jog? It's like I just knew I'd get there in time and everything would be okay. The world is weird, and I have many questions. What my mother said in the weeks leading up to her death scared us all. A few years ago, my mother died after a long battle with cancer. In her last few weeks, she was bedridden at home at one point and in heavy pain medication. The whole family took turns to help and spend time with her, and what she told us toward the end gave us all a shock. She kept having a scared reaction to something. She'd jump and say, "Oh God," or she'd swear as if something had made her jump. She didn't say anything at first, but then after a week or two blurted out something one day that gave us all the creeps. "I wish she'd stop scaring me. Tell him to go away." She was annoyed at something or someone, to be exact. Confused, we asked her what the problem was, and she told us. Apparently, in her last few weeks, she kept seeing her deceased partner walking around the house. He'd walk down the hallway or past her bedroom door. Sometimes he'd be sitting in her room, and every time it happened, she'd jump with fright. Obviously not expecting to see him there. She was more annoyed than scared. She'd see him several times a day, just going about his business as if he'd never left. Usually her reaction would be, "Oh, for God's sake, go away!" Not because she didn't want to see him, but because it kept making her jump. Our first thought was that it was something to do with the pain medication she was receiving. The nurse assured us that it wouldn't, cause hallucinations or visions. Scared the bloody crap out of us, I know that much. She went into a hospice a few weeks later and the visions stopped. Weird, huh? We still don't even talk about it. That's how creeped we all are. Around 1980, I was 15 then. I room and boarded at a small ranch. The ranch had a 25-stall barn. It was like boarding with my arena. My friend's parents had bought the ranch a couple of years earlier and needed help, so I moved in. I cleaned stalls, fed horses, took care of a few cows and a goat. My friend was my age and he had 2 younger brothers. For some reason, a horse stall number 13, we always had problems putting horses in there. We would put one in and it was clean with food and water. They would enter normally. Only one horse in the stall, by the way. It wouldn't be until the middle of the night that we would be awakened by my friend's father to go down to the barn as the horses in stall 13. It would be going berserk. On our way down to the barn, you could hear the horse wailing, screeching, and kicking. Upon entering the barn and activating the lights, we could see the stall door being kicked and bulging outward with each kick. We would open the stall and the horse would run out straight to the arena with its eyes wide and bucking as it ran. Before opening the stall door, we set up a blocked path so the horse would run right to the arena. That way it wouldn't get out of the barn or hurt any of us. We looked in the stall, and in all four corners of the stall the horse had dug all the way down to the cement base layer, and all four walls had holes kicked in them. This was not the only horse to do this. Any horse we put in there would have the same sort of repeat exactly at the same time at night. Any horse we put in there walked in normally to start, and was just fine when we would end the day with lights out and closing the barn doors. We couldn't figure why this was happening. We even tried putting in a couple of cows one time, and the exact same thing would happen to them. The barn also had some weird happenings while we were there as well. There were a couple of times in the summer as we worked inside of the barn that we would suddenly hear what we thought was a sudden downpouring of rain on the barn. Each of us came out wondering what was going on, as it had been sunny and 80+ outside as we went in. When we looked out the barn doors, it was sunny. We would run out, and as soon as we exited the barn into the sunlight, the sound of hard rain stopped. One of our chores at night when closing up the barn was for us to look down the sides of the stalls. We would be able to see if a stall door wasn't closed correctly. What would happen once in a while, by the way. And that's how we ended up our day. What started happening was as we looked and all the doors were flush-looking shut, suddenly a stall door would fly open like somebody opened it from the inside, and the door would slam against the stall. The several times when this happened, we ran to the stall. It was stall 13. After all the trouble we had with that stall, we just didn't put any horses in there or any livestock. It remained empty, and this is when this door started to open on its own. We ran to it because we thought we could catch one of my friend's brothers in there trying to scare us, but it was empty. My friend and I had mentioned to some neighbors about what we were experiencing, and one day we were told to talk to the next-door ranch owner, older man who had lived in the area for decades and knew the previous owners. We were shocked to find out that in the 1970s a family had lived there and had a teenage son who hung himself in that stall. We went back to that stall because we couldn't figure out how he could have hung himself, as each stalls had only a type of ceiling with a hole over it and a feed tray. We again were shocked when we looked and saw an old wooded beam straight across the stall just underneath the ceiling. We had not noticed this in all the times we had been in the stall, and the barn's other stalls didn't have this in them. We went and looked at all the other stalls again, and stall 13 was the only one that had that wood beam. My friend's dad converted that stall to a tack room after that. They never had any more issues there that I know about. I was there about 2 years working and boarding and had moved on to high school in the U.S. Army after. Ask Reddit. So I was raised Christian, only in the sense that Jesus and God were about as important as Santa. Don't know if that counts. I remember as a child once I figured out Santa wasn't real, beginning to question if God was a big lie made up by adults as well. By the time I reached adolescence, I realized I had no real reason to believe in God, began identifying as an atheist. I believed in no gods. I pondered the subject greatly, decided that it made much more sense that all the religions were wrong rather than one being right. And there was really no hard evidence for God, that everything in the Bible sounded like absolute nonsense, especially in light of my education in the sciences. The thing is that I understood that nothing could possibly matter but the answer to the question, do I have a purpose? I never stopped seeking if there was an answer. Nothing else was worth seeking, so I never stopped thinking about that very subject. All the conclusions I had come to, everything I saw pointed to religion being utter nonsense, the religious being the foolish and the uneducated, and that all of life and existence was some random accident that just happened to occur and would be over as soon as it started. I never questioned that stance until the day I had a good friend talk to me. He didn't have incredibly thought-provoking statements. He didn't have nearly any answers, but he had faith. I was mocking this man to his face for the beliefs that he held dearest, and he was brushing aside my rudeness as if it were leaves in his path. His message was clear. It was that he knew that there was a God, and that he was Jesus Christ. He confessed himself that he didn't have all the answers, but he knew religious leaders and I could talk to them. He was sure. I laughed off the entire conversation at that moment, but I distinctly remember in the moment before I fell asleep that night asking myself, could I have been wrong all this time? It was the first time I was no longer 100% sure there was no God. It opened a new chapter in my life. I had spent years finding every single reason to not believe in God, but had never taken the time to consider that there might actually be reasons to think that he does exist. I began to see them. The fact that the theme of human existence is the struggle between good and evil point directly toward him. Without God defining good and evil, all of our struggles, all of our dreams, all of our desires, all of our love, all of everything was just a bunch of complex chemical reactions. Everything I knew told me that, well, we experience and what we live is real, it's tangible. I was living it after all. Not only this, but I realized that this universe was made so that life, well, the one thing that could give existence meaning and purpose, could and would occur. Whatever caused this universe to happen made it so that it could and would have purpose. That demands sentience. That demands God. These thoughts continued for a month until I realized one day that it was true. It was all true. There was a God, and his love for us was so evident. The love of a God that put breath in our lungs. The love of a God that let the sun shine on our backs. The love of a God that's, well, lets us look into our loved one's eyes. It's the same God that multitudes have claimed to have witnessed to walk this earth in the flesh and laid down his life to save us. Everything became so clear in that moment. That night was the most incredible night of my life. Fell on my knees in repentance of my sins, willing to follow Jesus as my Lord. I received the Holy Spirit. I was born a new man who put all of his sin behind him in that one moment. I went to all those in my life, all those I'd instilled my brand of atheism into, and professed to them that I was wrong, that they needed to repent as well. I found myself in the midst of a group that was getting more heavily involved in crime to fuel our drug usage. I was laughed to scorn and quickly found myself living my days alone. It's been quite a few years since that day. I now find myself in a thriving church community that's living in obedience to Jesus. I couldn't even begin to explain to you the joy and mirth of knowing your Creator, of knowing your purpose, and of knowing your family. And you will go to spend the entire eternity with. This world is just the beginning of the beginning, that only those who are willing to repent of their sins and obey God will find eternal paradise to be their end. If I hadn't found Jesus, I know I would have been found guilty of the judgment of my sin and justly been condemned to an eternal hell for what I had done. My Creator loved me enough to give me a second chance, loved me enough to seek me and show me His love, loved me enough to walk the earth in the flesh and die at the hands of His own creation, so that way He could pour out His blood as payment for what I had done. He rose from the dead to the witness of hundreds, and has given His Spirit to countless thousands, so that way we could know that this was the truth. Ask Reddit. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story, since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date, and around the time that they would have had said goodnight, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drive up the mount of the canyon, got out of their cars, started hiking under just the light of the stars, especially since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feelings and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling as what was probably at the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt closest to being caught, he explained about the night that had lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he had heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body. For some reason, just turn around and walk away. Yes, I heard that noise too. My Aunt Sib and the Black Dog. When I was very young, my granddad's sisters came to visit often. They were old Romani, and you knew just by looking at them. Truthfully scared the shit out of little me when I was that age. They were old and approaching the ends of their lives, as it would turn out. But they were quite loving and would come to see us often. It was the 80s, and there was more emphasis on family back then, which I think has been lost since. My Aunt Sibiana was superstitious beyond the pale. I will always recall a day when me and one of my cousins were playing in the back garden. My Aunt Marine had been making dinner in the kitchen, and my Aunt Sibiana sat out in the yard watching us play. At some stage, a very large, dirty-looking black dog had come and sat directly outside of her gate. They sat and were staring directly at me and my cousin. My Aunt Sib reacted like we had Satan himself sat there. I don't understand a word of Romani Bar, but the odd word here is there to shame. She walked to the gate and started speaking in harsh tones to the dog. Now you're going to think the dog would have just gone and ran. The damn thing stood on its hind legs on the waist-high gate and snarled at her, teeth bared, the whole deal. My aunt never budged, carried on shouting at the damn thing, till it finally jumped down and skulked off away from the house. By this time, my granddad had come out to see what the commotion was. My Aunt Sib turned to him and simply said, "I'm not taking them. I told it to wait till they were ready, and it argued." It's one of my earliest memories, and it stuck with me. This tiny little woman not showing 1 ounce of fear. Still, to this day, don't know what it was all about. But I do know this. My cousin passed away a few years ago. We were talking. She was in an immense amount of pain. She said she was ready now, as it had gotten to be too much. It wasn't long after that she did succumb. It wasn't till very recently that I remembered what my aunt said that day. I told it to wait till they were ready. Gave me a shiver, that one did. Husband and I heard a man's voice in our home last night. So my husband and I were watching a scary movie. We don't usually watch scary movies, but we thought it would be fun since our kid was staying with his grandparents for the night. About halfway through the movie, we got bored of it, decided to call it a night. It was around 11:30 p.m. We were watching it in our bed, so we just turned off the TV and lights and laid down. Within maybe 30 seconds of turning off the movie, I hear a man talking. It sounded like it was coming from our basement. We live in a log home and we sleep in the loft, which is open to the rest of the house. The stairs leading up to our room are made of half logs, so you can peer through them and see down the stairs, and that leads directly below into the basement. By the way, the basement also has no door. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. I do have auditory hallucinations before I fall asleep all the time, so I thought that's what it was. We have a German shepherd who sleeps at the top of the stairs in the loft with us. She hadn't seemed to notice anything. About 10 seconds after hearing the voice, I hear several other sounds. Sounds of something moving in the basement. Jostling and gentle thuds. At this point, my husband whispers, "Did you hear that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "It sounded like a man talking." And I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah." So he jumps out of bed, puts on his robe, gets the gun, and starts checking around the house. I have my phone up ready to dial 911 if the windows are closed and locked, and the alarms on them are undisturbed. Same with the sliding door. We checked the rest of the house and still nothing. I'm super freaked out at this point, and he has to get up early for work, so go back upstairs to our bed. He goes to sleep, but I'm too freaked out, and I stay up with a lamp on, ready to attack the sneaky intruder, till about 2 a.m. when I was too tired to stay up any longer. I heard a couple more strange noises up until I fell asleep. Most of them I attributed to the house shifting. My box fan made a high-pitched squealing noise a few times, which I've never noticed before. Almost sounded like bats squeaking. I just cannot relax about the situation, because I can't come up with a solution as to why this happened. The house was secured. There's no way anybody could be inside. We live in a rural area and know our neighbors. They don't wander around our property, and it just doesn't make sense. The voice didn't sound particularly threatening. It sounded like a country boy talking to his buddy. Not super loud, not quiet, just a casual interaction. Jeez. Was this a bad idea? Me and my brother brought a Ouija board about a year ago. That's when my parents were gone on a trip. It wouldn't respond if my brother was playing, but when I played alone, it gave me the answers I wanted. Prior to this, I had some things happen to me, such as hearing voices and sleep paralysis episodes. I believe it all started about 4 years ago when me and my brother decided to do this thing that we've seen on YouTube called the dancing chair ritual. Basically, it said play this song, Tiptoe in the Tulips. If the song stops, you have summoned a spirit. If the music plays all the way through, you won the game. If the chair flips over, then don't go in that room alone ever. So me and my brother, being us, like 15 and 17, we were skeptical. So in the middle of doing this, the music stopped. We didn't think anything of it and played the rest of the song, then had a few laughs. The next night around 3:50 or something, our bedroom door started rotating slowly. I pointed it out that my brother called out "Paw Paw" and nothing responded. He said it again, and then once he said it, the door handle shook violently like somebody was trying to rip it off. My brother yelled "stop," in which it did stop. Got up, looked around, no one was there. Really wished I could have filmed it. Then after that, a week or two later, we were at my cousin's house and we heard the piano play, which we were confused, because all of the adults were helping move, so we asked everybody if they played the piano. Everyone said no. This was shortly after my great-grandfather's passing. Then we asked my dad, and he said no, which this is what terrified my dad. No, son, whatever was here as your pawpaw was here is now gone. That left chills down my spine. I have a video that I can get from my dad or something sounding like it's dragging a body or something from upstairs. But I'll see if I can get it first. It feels like someone I don't know invaded my dream, and it's creeping me out. I had a highly vivid, already unusual nightmare, which seemed more like a disjointed movie, although I haven't watched any movies since the beginning of the pandemic, and definitely not one like this. In this dream, I was traveling through familiar feeling places, interacting with some weird group called a distinct name that I clearly remember, but for some reason feel like I really shouldn't write it here. Never heard of it before in real life, so if somebody believes to know the name of the group I'm talking about, please write me a personal message. That would be crazy if I would be convinced that this is a real sleep invasion. I remember there were some initiation sessions where the members of that group were implying I should join them. Not demanding anything, but I was sort of feeling a kind of social pressure. However, I got a bad feeling about their community as it felt cultish. They seemed like they were normal people meeting in a seemingly run-down place outside and doing weird paranormal stuff, which is why I chose the sub. Not people I'd usually hang out with. Anyway, I got to know a girl, and she seems to have been a long-term member of this organization. She looked like she was exhausted all the time, but also intimidated too much by something to leave her group of associates and do something else. Whenever I said or did anything hinting at the topic of not wanting to join them, she just had this pitying look in her eyes, but didn't try and convince me otherwise, which made me feel even more uneasy. I felt bad about her and wanting to get her out of there, but also didn't get the feeling she would choose to come with me. Anyway, there was this one guy in particular she was wary about. She gave me the feeling that I should be wary too. Can vaguely remember his name, but also don't want to spell it out for some reason. I don't know if he was part or some leader of their group or something completely else. In any case, that guy showed up. He wanted me to stop doing certain things in real life. He knew things he should not know, and I refused to stop bad things would happen. Or if I refused to stop these bad things would happen. He never said anything hostile outright, but I got the feeling. He was wearing an ankle-length trench coat-like dark gray jacket that had lots of pockets on the outside. He talked to me using my last name and in English, not my first language. And the weirdest part is that he had a very distinctly visible face that I can remember quite well. Extremely unusual for any dream of mine. All other faces in the dream are only vague memories. He was my age, maybe a bit younger. He was white and had blonde hair, a little bit shorter than me, maybe 1.8 meters. He was an American as far as I can tell from the accent. I'm not a native speaker. Every time I felt scared in my dream, I thought something like, "I want to get out of here," and the scene would jump away in a twisted jumble and into a new scene like in a crappy movie. I didn't consciously choose to, but it felt like I was dragged through time, and I knew in that dream that a few years were skipped backwards or forwards, and during each jump of time, but there would be new people with new terrible things happening. But this one distinct guy in his weird dark coat was following me. He knew where I was for some reason. Other people and things were attacking me too, but I don't know if they were his helpers or just random nightmare people and creatures that this guy invaded. In the last two scenes, I found myself trapped quickly in some corner after escaping some bad guys and trying to avert some disaster. And both times he appeared walking slowly toward me. He tried touching my head, reaching out with his left hand while the other one was in his coat side pocket. When he reached out to touch me, I really didn't want that to happen for some reason, even though he wasn't saying anything threatening and was kinda smiling kindly. It was mortal dread. The second time this happened, I got so scared I woke up. But that is when the weirdest thing happened. Yet, I awoke and clearly knew I woke up, but the dread didn't go away. So I looked around the room and on the side of my king-sized bed, not my side, but the only one my girlfriend was sleeping in, I saw a nebulous black humanoid figure standing still. It sort of moved and it was breathing heavily. I pushed myself up and into the wall behind me, but as I did that, it slowly dissolved. I couldn't tell if it was the coat guy. Looked like a blotchy, blurred humanoid shadow of average height. Anyway, those are all the details that I can remember clearly. While everything felt like a dream, that guy felt distinctly real. And that one girl that wanted to warn me about him felt somewhat real, but I don't remember her features. I'm upset about this because I don't feel inclined to stop the things he wanted me to stop. And I'm scared he's going to haunt me again. The Pink House. This house had been in my family for a little over 40 years, and throughout that time, everybody who's ever lived there, just about every extended and immediate family member, at some point, has experienced paranormal activity. I am still determining how much of them this happened in 2005 in South California. We had just been evicted from our house, found ourselves at my Nana's house again. I hadn't lived there since I was 4 years old, but here I was sleeping on the floor of the second story with my mother and two brothers. We had left our former house with nothing but clothes and trash bags. Moved the bags against the wall so we had room to sleep. The entire floor was bare with no furniture, not even a curtain rod for the windows, so it was just the four of us and our trash bags. The second floor had been an attic before they converted it, so it ran the length of the house and was wide and long, with two small storage closets that always gave me the creeps, and a standard closet on one far end of the room. It was dark. My brothers were sprawled far away from me, my mom on one side of the room and us on the other. I was having trouble sleeping. I remember there was a storm with lightning that would light up the room occasionally from the flashes. There was one large window facing the house's west side and one smaller window facing north. I couldn't sleep and felt uneasy, like an energy shift had happened in the room. I had seen things in that house before at that point, but tried my best to chalk up my unease to nerves and stress. I scanned the room, made sure it was just us there. Nothing looked off, so I laid back down and closed my eyes again. This was before the cell phones of today. We were too poor to afford any cell phones anyway, so I had nothing to distract myself with in the dark, and I still had that strange feeling of something being off. I opened my eyes again and started to stare at the wall in front of me as I lay on my side with my back against the opposite wall. That's when I began to focus on a black trash bag. It looked more prominent than the others, off in some way. I remember a flash of lightning lighting up the room, and seeing that trash bag I was focused on was just pitch black. No glossing effect like the others. Now I was terrified. What the fuck kind of trash bag was that? No one had a duffel bag, and we all grabbed what we could and stuffed them into a big hefty black bag. I could feel my heart racing as I watched the trash bag move a little. Like it, whatever it was crouching down facing the wall with its back to me, shifting its weight trying to make itself look small. I can only describe it as something cloaked in the blackest material I'd ever seen. Pressed myself as close to the wall as possible, didn't take my eyes off it. I contemplated screaming and waking everyone in the room up, but then it shifted in its crouched pose again. I did what my Nana had always said to do when I was scared. I started to recite the Lord's Prayer in Spanish in my head, just like she had taught me. It then started to turn its head very slowly, like it knew it was there. Words cannot describe the side profile of this thing. It had black skin and a nose, and like those silly 90s Halloween prosthetics witch kits. It was long, bent, and crooked, and I could see the white of its eyes bulging in such a hideous, abnormal way as it looked at me from the corner of its eye. I gasped loudly and looked around to shake my mom awake. I wouldn't be alone looking at this creature if she woke up, crouching in the dark. My mom was pissed that I had woken her up. When I told her there was something evil against the other wall, she got up angrily and snapped on the overhead light. There was nothing but the trash bags we had brought with us. She told me to stop being a baby and let her get some sleep, so I begged her to leave on the closet light. I practically clung onto her like a giant koala, which is embarrassing as I was 14 at the time. Whatever the hell I saw had scared me so much. It didn't show itself to me again, and that face haunts my nightmares sometimes. For years, I told myself it was just the stress of the move and the overall chaos that my life was at the time, till my siblings and I were reminiscing about our experiences at that house. As I relayed this story to them, my sister cut me off and said, "You saw that too, like a witch thing." My brother chimed in, stating that he had a nearly identical experience, but thought it was a large pile of clothes on the floor that he saw. My sister saw that thing crouch as a shadow one night when she lived on the second floor alone. When she had left, we moved in shortly after, and she said she slept with the light on for weeks after her encounter. We all had seen it separately, but described it all the same. Hunched down or crouching with black skin, huge bulging eyes. Think of Jeepers Creepers 2 when he licked the bus window. And a big, long, crooked nose. I don't think it's a witch, I think it's something very old and very negative. Something evil is up there. I think it showed itself to me that night. I lived there for 4 years and had plenty of awful things happen, but thankfully I didn't see that thing again and haven't seen it since, and I hope I never see it again. The hallucinations are driving me crazy. Some insight first. I've had sleeping issues ever since I was a middle schooler, and sleep paralysis ever since high school. I'm 19 now. The paralysis has always been scary, horrifying, and terrifying enough that I wouldn't want my worst enemy to experience it. I've always pushed through it all myself since my family couldn't be bothered by it. They think it's nothing to worry about. Mind you, I usually sleep at appropriate times as well. So them being very scary didn't affect me a lot, but recently, the paralysis has become downright creepy. It's like something is trying to lure me. Whatever it is has been intimidating my family or friends in the hallucinations I experience. It's trying to do something to me that I don't know. Let me tell you about the recent sleep paralysis experiences. The first one goes like this. I'm laying on my bed sleeping. I see my mom approaching my door and looking through a small crack. I thought maybe she just was checking on me, which is very normal. But then I experience a certain feeling of dread. Chills throughout my body. That's when I realized that it wasn't my mother. It was just darkness looking through the creek. That's when I managed to break through the paralysis. It left me numb for a bit. And now the latest one. As usual, I'm hallucinating while having sleep paralysis. I'm at this alleyway which is very long and dark that's right in front of my home. There's a door there. A very close friend of mine standing next to it asks me to pass through the door. I felt as if I was sure, why not? Went through the long alleyway. But right when I was about to pass through the door, the feeling of dread hit me again. Same goosebumps rose throughout my body. The person standing there wasn't my friend. It was the same thing from the previous experience. Glad I didn't get to see whatever was up close this time. I broke through the paralysis right at that moment. Also, a few days ago, I woke up at around 2, sleeping next to my mother because of bad health. That's when I heard a specific noise made by her ankle bracelet throughout the house. It was everywhere. My mom is a light sleeper. Kind of wakes up easily. I tried to wake her up a lot, but she didn't wake me up. I don't know why. Now, today, I realized something else too. I hallucinate a lot whenever I'm trying to sleep. It's not the sleep paralysis type of a hallucination. It's just hallucinations I see when my eyes are closed. And these always revolve around family members of mine being overly aggressive and creepy around me. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but now that I do, I'm even more scared. This one time I actually felt someone pinch me at my knees that I was hallucinating something creepy. When I was out of the hallucination, I actually felt physical pain at that very spot. I've seen out of the world bizarre stuff in my sleep paralysis stuff. I want to mention them all, but it's just too much. This one time I was bombarded by horrifying images, one after another at a haphazard speed, which was done by a doll that laughed while I was scared for my life. This one was probably the scariest one I've ever seen. It's hard to describe it in words. Another time I experienced the same hallucination twice on adjacent days. That's where I had this weird external old white hair sort of stuck to my head that just disappeared when I pulled it out and threw it. I'm very, very terrified again. All these feel paranormal. My friends who have relations to these kind of family backgrounds told me that it might be something that I should see someone or do something about. What do you guys think? Am I just paranoid, or is it something to be scared about? Seeing figures pretending to be my brother. So this happened as 2 instances, one on February 5th, 6:30 a.m., and today at 6:16 a.m. So I'll start the first time that it happened. I went to the laundry room to put my clothes to wash, and only lights were on in the laundry room. The light in my room, which illuminated a bit of the hallway. So when I was finished with my laundry, I heard footsteps. I saw a dark figure running at me with heavy footsteps, so I automatically assumed it was my brother. So I yelled his name, then the figure took a sudden right to the living room a bit confused, because he would usually answer. So I turned on a light to the living room, and to my shock, there was no one there. Went to my brother's room to ask him if he left his room, to which he replied, "No, I haven't." So that sent a shiver down my spine. So today, around 6:15, still in my bed, I opened my eyes and saw my younger brother standing next to the closet holding his tablet. Not facing toward me, just the whole body was pointing at my closet. Thought it was a bit weird because my door was closed. So I closed my eyes, trying to fall back asleep. Then I decided to open my eyes, and I see him much closer, like standing on the side of my bed from me, still in that same position, just way closer. I tried to say something, but felt like I couldn't speak. I fought, and then I said, "Talk," multiple times, and then it vanished. I got up, went to my younger brother's room, and there he was, fast asleep. Sent shivers down my spine. Thought about it, and maybe it was sleep paralysis. I'm not sure because I was still able to move, and I know what sleep paralysis feels like. Didn't feel anything like sleep paralysis. Ask Reddit. If it is possible, then our brains sure suck at it. If deja vu really is seeing the future, why is it always about mundane things? If we were real neurological power, why don't we see the future about things that would actually be helpful? Most people's deja vu stories are about mundane crap. Or me reading the same story twice. Mundane crap like, I dreamed I was doing a cannonball into a pool and ended up going to the pool at the last minute the next day and I did a cannonball. Or something like, I dreamed a girl in my class changed her hairstyle the next day when I saw her, it had changed. It always is such mundane, pointless crap. If we can see the future, why aren't there more, I dreamed I got hit by a red car and the next day I recognized the road from the dream and stopped and the red car came flying out of nowhere? Or perhaps something like, I dreamed I got mugged on my way to my car and at the end of the day I got a group of coworkers to leave together and I saw the mugger watching us as I got in my car. If our brains are evolving precognition, we must have a long path of evolution ahead of us before we get to seeing actual useful information. If you take the spiritual side and believe God is sending you information, great. But again, why would God not send useful information? Even when it's useful information, proving you received that information in advance is really difficult. How do you know your brain isn't just really good at crunching information you're not even consciously aware of? Maybe you actually saw the red car the day before, and only your subconscious picked up on it, and perhaps warned you about it. Maybe you consciously didn't see the mugger stalking you yesterday, but your subconscious did, and got the message through. Our brains are amazing, biological pattern-finding machines that are hell-bent on self-preservation and do it without us even knowing it's happening. The only compelling precognition stories I've read deal with people who have a precognitive experience and actually tell someone else about it before it actually happens. All the stories about having a dream about something and then remembering the dream as the event is happening, or stories where people realize they remember an event as they're experiencing it, are not compelling. In these situations, your brain is misfiring. It's taking all the information you're expecting and putting it into things that have happened before file instead of the things happening now file. So you're experiencing the present as if it were a memory. You're experiencing a false memory, and that's why it feels so weird. You consciously are trying to reconcile the idea that this is something that's happened before. One of the ways you reconcile it is by falsely determining that you remember having a dream about it, or that you're somehow repeating the event again. It's mostly just all in our heads. Ask Reddit. I was using a Ouija board with some friends the summer after I graduated high school. It was me, I'm a male, one of my good guy friends, and two girls we thought were cute, but that barely knew us and we barely knew them. Now let me give you some background. After about 3 months before this happened, my grandfather died. I was not close to my grandfather because my father despised the man and made a point of keeping my brother and I away from him. But I had met my grandfather 2 times, as a very small child and then again on his deathbed when I was 18 or 19. The only reason my dad took us to meet him when he was in the hospice was to rub it in his face. It was my dad's way of saying, "Look what I did that you couldn't do." I didn't realize that was the reason until much later, and I felt bad about it then. But I don't think my grandfather even cared that that was the reason behind the visit. He was just so happy to see us before he died that the emotions poured out of him. He passed of lymphoma and complications of being a lifelong cigarette smoker. After he died, I really wasn't that sad. Didn't think about it that much since I barely knew the man. Back to the Ouija board. These 2 girls knew nothing about me or my relatives or life, and my good friend that was with me knew I had a grandfather that died, but didn't know any of the details about his life or even his name. We were playing around with the Ouija board for about 10 minutes, and we were about to call it quits and say that they don't work, and that's when it started moving. We only got 5 words to appear on the board, but they absolutely shocked me. The words were, "Melvin, Bob, Gamble, so sorry." Now I'll explain the relevance. My grandfather's real name was Melvin, but he went by Bob all the time. Only his family knew his real name unless he would have to give out his legal name. For instance, when he was in hospice, they called him Melvin because he had his legal name on the system. The reason my dad despised his father, my grandfather, was because my grandfather was a gambling addict who had taken all of the family's money, dipped to go lead a life of drinking and gambling not once but twice. My dad used to tell me stories of my grandma crying at night trying to figure out how he would get enough money to pay bills and feed my dad and my 2 aunts. No one with me knew any of this information, so I knew no one was moving the Ouija board on their own. As it hit me that what I was reading came from the board, I was shocked. After thinking about it and reflecting on it for quite some time after the event happened, I became very happy that it happened. It made me forgive him. Thought about how difficult his year in hospice must have been, laying in a bed fighting for every last breath you can take, all while thinking about how your own family and your old children despise you enough to not even let you see your grandkids. I wish I could see him alive one more time so I could tell him that I forgave him. I always considered myself a skeptic of the paranormal, but I just don't know any other way around. This little board could have been giving me these kinds of intelligent responses. That's one of the more compelling Ouija board stories I've read or heard about, and also kind of beautiful. Ask Reddit. About a year ago, my girlfriend and I moved into a place with a few friends. Prior to moving in, I had been over a lot. It's above a music venue which one of my roommates manages. So there's always people in and out. A large majority of those who have lived with her stayed over for quite a long period of time. They say that this place is haunted. I had my doubts since I don't really believe in anything paranormal. It's an old building and pretty much everything people say or hear or see can be explained away. Once I moved in for the first few months, it was a lot of me doing that to erase the minds of those staying over who had heard about our haunted house. Well, one of my roommates, who no longer lives with us, found an old painting sitting beside a dumpster on her way home from work one night. This painting is really weird. It's of a face with a bunch of red lines painted all over it. It's definitely hand-painted and hand-sketched canvas. Stretched. My mother's an artist, so there's little things you can look at kind of to tell these things. Something about this painting really made me and the rest of my roommates uncomfortable. But none of us are believers, so we didn't make a fuss about it. The weird stuff started to happen almost immediately. 2 nights after she hung it up in the living room, we were all sitting around the couch, hanging out and playing a board game, listening to music. The music suddenly stopped, and most of the lights dimmed. Since we have really bad electrical surges, no one thought too much of this. Then all of us heard what sounded like footsteps running across our roof. We had raccoons that live in the attic, and were well aware of what they sound like. This was not them. The footsteps started at the back of the house and ran all the way to where right above we were. The living room was in the front part of the house, facing the main road. Once the footsteps stopped, the painting fell from its place on the wall. My roommate, for whatever reason, didn't want to throw it out right then and there, despite all of us being very uncomfortable. She did, however, move it into her room. The weirdness didn't stop there. I would occasionally hear a faint male voice coming from her room when no one was there. I'd see a shadowy figure standing in her doorway, and watch as her door would open and close itself occasionally. The last really weird thing that happened before she moved out was one night my girlfriend and I were both woke up at the exact same time. I got up to get us water, and as I opened my door, my other 3 roommates all exited their rooms to also get water. Every single one of us were woken up from a dead sleep at the exact same time. No loud noises, no explanations. She moved out and took her painting with her. Since then, there have been a few more weird paranormal experiences I've had at that place, including a very strange one concerning a traveler I met in a dream. But that one was probably the most frightening. Sweet dreams. See ya.